Japanese soldiers were literally laughing at American weapons in the Pacific. They thought it was a joke, until one moment changed everything and turned their laughter into pure terror. The year is 1944. Deep in the jungles of the Pacific, Japanese forces had been dominating for years. They'd seen everything the Americans threw at them. Rifles, grenades, artillery, nothing new, nothing scary. So when intelligence reports started coming in about a new American weapon, the response from Japanese command was basically laughter. They genuinely thought it was propaganda, a desperate American lie. But what happened next on a tiny island called Peleliu would prove them so catastrophically wrong that it would redefine warfare forever. Let me take you back to understand why they were so confident. The Japanese military in 1944 wasn't just experienced. They were hardened by years of brutal combat across the Pacific. They'd fortified islands with underground tunnel systems that could withstand naval bombardments. They'd perfected defensive tactics that turned every beach landing into a bloodbath for the Americans. Their soldiers were trained to fight to the death, never surrender, and they'd proven time and time again they could hold positions against overwhelming odds. The Americans had a massive problem. Every island they tried to take cost thousands of lives. Iwo Jima, Tarawa, Saipan, the casualty rates were insane. Marines were being cut down by hidden bunkers, underground fortifications, and cave systems that conventional weapons just couldn't touch. You could drop bombs on a position all day long, and Japanese soldiers would just wait it out underground, then pop back up and start firing again. American commanders were desperate for a solution. The war was dragging on. Every island meant more body bags going home, more families destroyed. The Japanese defensive strategy was simple but effective. Dig deep, wait for the Americans to land, let them get close, then unleash hell from protected positions. Rinse and repeat. Traditional weapons weren't cutting it. You couldn't throw a grenade into a cave system and expect it to clear out defenders who were 50 feet back in the darkness. You couldn't charge a bunker with rifles when machine gun fire was pouring out of a reinforced concrete position. Artillery and naval guns could pound an area for hours, but if the enemy was underground, they'd just survive and keep fighting. The Marines needed something that could reach into these fortified positions, something that could go around corners, flow into caves, and eliminate threats that were hidden behind walls and underground. Something that would make the impossible possible. That's when American engineers developed something that seemed almost medieval in its brutality, but modern in its execution. The flamethrower. But this wasn't just any flamethrower. This was the M2A17, a weapon so terrifying that even the guys who had to carry it were scared of their own equipment. Picture this thing, a soldier strapping on 2 tanks of napalm fuel on his back, each tank holding 4 gallons of thickened gasoline that would stick to whatever it touched and burn at over 2,000 degrees, connected to a gun assembly that could shoot a stream of liquid fire up to 45 meters. That's almost half a football field of flames. The weapon weighed about 70 pounds when fully loaded. Imagine carrying that through jungle terrain, through mud, under enemy fire. And here's the worst part. Everyone knew that if you were the guy carrying the flamethrower, you had a giant target on your back. Literally, enemy soldiers would focus fire on flamethrower operators because they knew one bullet in those fuel tanks and the whole thing would explode, taking the operator with it. But the American military was betting everything on this weapon. They trained special units, guys who volunteered, because nobody was forcing anyone to carry napalm on their back into combat. These soldiers practiced in training camps, learning how to operate under pressure, how to get close enough to use the weapon effectively, how to work with rifle squads who would provide covering fire. The Japanese intelligence network caught wind of these new weapons. Reports filtered back to command about Americans training with strange equipment that shot fire. And the response? Mockery. Actual, genuine mockery. Japanese officers analyzed the reports and came to a conclusion that would haunt them. They thought flamethrowers were impractical, too heavy, too dangerous to the operator, too short-range to be effective. They figured any soldier dumb enough to carry one would be shot down before getting close enough to use it. They literally briefed their troops that if they saw an American with tanks on his back, just shoot him first and enjoy the fireworks. One Japanese commander was quoted in captured documents as saying the flamethrower was an act of desperation by a military that had run out of real ideas. Another wrote that the Americans are so afraid of our fortifications they are resorting to primitive fire weapons like ancient savages. This wasn't secret mockery either. Japanese propaganda radio broadcasts made fun of the flamethrowers. They told their soldiers to laugh at the Americans who were so scared they needed to bring fire to a gunfight. They genuinely believed their concrete bunkers, their underground positions, their fortified caves would make flamethrowers completely useless. They were about to learn a lesson in the absolute worst way possible. September 15, 1944, the island of Peleliu, a tiny chunk of coral and rock in the Pacific that most people had never heard of. But this island was strategic. It had an airfield. Whoever controlled Peleliu controlled air superiority over a huge chunk of the Pacific, so the Japanese had turned it into a fortress. They'd built over 500 fortified positions, underground tunnels connected defensive points. Cave systems housed artillery pieces that could be rolled out, fired, then rolled back before American spotters could locate them. They'd put machine gun nests in coral ridges that overlooked every beach. They had 11,000 troops dug in and ready to fight to the last man. American intelligence estimated the island would fall in 4 days. 4 days of fighting, then move on to the next target. They were off by a factor of almost 20. The battle would last 73 days and become one of the bloodiest fights in the Pacific theater. The 1st Marine Division hit the beaches. Immediately, it was chaos. Japanese fire poured down from elevated positions. Marines were pinned on the beach, taking casualties, unable to advance. The naval bombardment that was supposed to soften up the defenses had barely scratched the underground fortifications. Every time Marines tried to push forward, they'd run into another bunker, another cave, another position that conventional weapons couldn't touch. That's when the flamethrower units got their orders. Move up and clear the fortifications. These guys knew what they were signing up for, but knowing and doing are two very different things. They had to cross open ground, get within 30 or 40 meters of enemy positions, then unleash hell while under fire from multiple directions. The first flamethrower attack happened on the 2nd day of the battle. A Marine unit was pinned down by a bunker that had already killed a dozen men. Machine gun fire was constant. Grenades bounced off the reinforced concrete. Artillery had tried to take it out and failed. The bunker was built into a coral ridge with only a small firing slit visible. A flamethrower operator named Corporal Lewis got the nod. His squad provided covering fire while he moved up, staying low, using every bit of cover he could find. Japanese soldiers in the bunker saw him coming. They focused fire on him. Bullets kicked up coral dust around his feet. One round hit his helmet and ricocheted off. He got within range, 30 meters, 25, 20. He could see the muzzle flash from the bunker's machine gun. Then he pulled the trigger on his flamethrower. What happened next was captured by a combat photographer who was embedded with the unit. The stream of napalm shot out and went directly through that firing slit. The bunker was sealed except for that one opening, which meant all that burning fuel had nowhere to go except inside. Flames erupted from every crack in the concrete, smoke poured out, and then the screaming started. The Japanese soldiers inside had gone from confident defenders to men being cooked alive in their own fortification. Some tried to run out. They were shot down. Others stayed inside and burned. The Marines who witnessed it said it lasted maybe 15 seconds of actual flame, but the screaming went on for almost a minute. When it stopped, the bunker was silent. Smoke drifted out of the firing slit. The position that had held up an entire Marine advance was eliminated. Word spread fast, both to the Americans and to the Japanese. The Marines realized they'd found their solution. The Japanese realized their mockery had been premature. Over the next few days, flamethrowers became the primary weapon for clearing fortifications on Peleliu. Every cave system, every bunker, every underground position that had seemed invincible suddenly became a death trap for the defenders inside. The Japanese soldiers started to panic. The weapon they'd laughed at was now their worst nightmare. You couldn't shoot it down from a protected position because once that stream of fire came through your opening, you were done. You couldn't wait it out underground because napalm would flow into tunnels and keep burning, consuming all the oxygen, creating toxic smoke that would kill you even if the flames didn't reach you. There are Japanese diary entries that were recovered after the battle. One soldier wrote, "The fire weapons are worse than anything we imagined. We called them foolish. We were the fools. There is no defense. You can only pray it doesn't come for your position." Another entry, found on a dead Japanese officer, said, "Command told us to laugh at the fire carriers. Now my men are begging to surrender rather than face the flames. I cannot blame them. I have seen what it does." The psychological impact was massive. Japanese soldiers who had been willing to fight to the death, who had been trained never to surrender, started abandoning positions when they heard flamethrowers were coming. Some tried to surrender, which was almost unheard of in the Pacific theater. Others would flee deeper into cave systems, which often just trapped them when Marines sealed the caves or used explosives to collapse tunnels. One of the most famous moments came when a Marine flamethrower unit approached a large cave system that intelligence estimated held over 100 Japanese soldiers. The entrance was fortified. Machine guns covered the approach. It looked like it would take days to clear and cost dozens of American lives. The flamethrower team coordinated with demolition experts. They set up a diversion at one entrance while flamethrower operators approached from two other openings. When they were in position, all three operators opened up simultaneously, shooting streams of napalm into the cave system from different angles. What happened inside that cave was hell on earth. The napalm flowed through the tunnels, igniting everything it touched. The flames consumed the oxygen. Japanese soldiers deeper in the cave system suffocated before the fire even reached them. Those near the entrances tried to run out into machine gun fire. Some burned to death in the tunnels. Others died from smoke inhalation. When Marines finally entered the cave system hours later, after the fires had burned out, they found over 90 bodies. The entire defensive position had been eliminated with 3 flamethrower operators and supporting infantry. In previous battles, clearing a position like that might have taken days and cost 50 or more American casualties. The effectiveness was undeniable, but it came at a cost. Flamethrower operators had one of the highest casualty rates of any combat role in the Pacific. They were priority targets. They carried explosive fuel on their backs. They had to get closer to the enemy than almost anyone else. The life expectancy of a flamethrower operator in heavy combat was measured in minutes, not hours. But those who survived became legends. They were the guys who could single-handedly break a Japanese defensive line. They were the ones other Marines wanted on their team when assaulting a fortified position. They were the psychological weapon that broke the will of an enemy who supposedly never broke. By the time the Battle of Peleliu ended after 73 days of fighting, flamethrowers had cleared hundreds of fortified positions. What the Japanese military had dismissed as a desperate joke had proven to be one of the most effective weapons in the Pacific theater. The mockery had turned to terror, and that terror spread to every Japanese-held island. After Peleliu, Japanese defensive doctrine changed. They started building positions with multiple escape routes, trying to avoid being trapped when flamethrowers came. But it didn't matter. The Americans had figured out the counter to fortified warfare. Every subsequent island battle saw flamethrower units play a crucial role. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, every major engagement. The weapon that was laughed at became the weapon that helped end the Pacific War. It's estimated that flamethrowers cleared thousands of fortified positions and saved tens of thousands of American lives by making it possible to neutralize defenses without costly frontal assaults. The psychological impact lasted long after the war. Captured Japanese soldiers, when interviewed, listed flamethrowers as one of the most feared weapons they faced. Not the bombs, not the artillery, the fire that could reach them anywhere. The lesson: never underestimate a weapon based on how it looks or sounds. The Japanese military made that mistake and paid for it with thousands of lives and lost battles. What seemed impractical and desperate turned out to be devastatingly effective. Sometimes the simplest solution, fire, is the one that works when everything else fails. Hit subscribe if you want more untold war stories that changed history.